I mean, what do you think? You think they stand a chance? You're on their side, aren't you? Who are you betting on,
Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?
Look at these lies.
One shall stand, one shall fall.
Even if one of them survives.
The only way to stop him is to make another movie.
Welcome to The Celluloid Mirror, a film discussion podcast presented by 4 Mile Circus, a media services company based in Brooklyn that produces original films, videos, podcasts, and more. On each episode of The Celluloid Mirror, we pair two very different films to see what they reflect about each other and the audience watching. I am one of your hosts, and I am Nicole Solomon.
And I am the other host, Sean Mannion. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the 1984 romantic comedy Splash and the 2015 horror musical, The Lure. First, we'll give a quick synopsis of each film and outline the primary connections we see between them. Then we'll share our own reactions before diving into analysis of some of the shared themes. And joining us today, Nicole. Where's the guest, Nicole?
Hey, I'm here. I don't know what you're complaining about. I showed up.
I'm complaining that you're here.
Do you want to go? This can be a short
I can
episode.
go. I can
Bye,
go.
everybody.
I can go. Bye.
Bye. We don't have a guest today.
We don't need
everybody.
no guests. We've had lots of guests.
We're going back to basics. We're going back to basics. So it's just me and Sean and some mermaids talking about them. That's what we're gonna do today. We will have future episodes with guests again.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe.
If
We've had a lot of guests. We had like 5 people just in the last 2 episodes. It's a lot of guests.
That's true. It's a lot of guests. We don't have room to like keep them anymore.
No. The closet is full.
It's full.
It's full.
We're gonna have to wait till next season for more guests. That's not true.
We're gonna have.
Or is it?
We don't know.
We don't know. We don't know what's happening. Other than that, today we're talking about Splash. We're talking about The Lure. And I guess since we have no guests, we can stick with this thankless task. You and I are going to have to synopsize these movies, Sean.
Well, I'm just going to say that one of the things that saddens me is that what we should really do is we should really just send Che the movies that we're going to watch and have him synopsize them.
That's a good idea. We could have friend of the show and episode 3 guest, Che Broadnax, provide synopses for all future Celluloid Mirror selections, whether or not he has seen them. I would be curious to see what he would say about films he hasn't seen. I believe he has seen both of these, though.
Well, everybody should see both of these, so especially because we're talking about them.
Especially since it's the law.
It is. It is the law. It is the law, much like Sylvester Stallone. Would you like to do Splash or The Lure?
I'll do Splash, how about, because it's first on this document that I'm looking at right now. Splash! It's a movie. It's from 1984. It's a romantic comedy of sorts. It follows, I forget the name of Tom Hanks's character, but we first see him as a young man who falls overboard, some shit. He's like a mermaid. He's on a boat, I think, with his parents, and he falls in the water, and he almost drowns, and he has this beautiful moment with a young mermaid child, and everything's in black and white because it's the past and they want to make sure we know that. And then he gets rescued. That's it. And then some decades later,
his name is Alan.
Alan. How could I have forgotten?
It's such a unique and distinctive name. And his brother is Freddie.
I'm not going to remember any of this.
I'm just helping.
I'll try. I'll do my best. Alan, Tom Hanks's character, is living in New York City. He's in that rat race. He's unlucky in love. He's got a girlfriend, but he doesn't love her, and she doesn't love him, and she dumps him early in the film, which is pretty reasonable given that their relationship clearly had no future and they didn't really like each other very much. He's like in fruit selling. He's like a fruit distributor with his brother Freddie, played by John Candy, who I had forgotten was in this film until this rewatch. And his whole thing is just like, oh, I just want to meet the right girl and I just can't do it. And he ends up going drunkenly after a wedding to Cape Cod and getting taken on a little motorboat by a local and falling overboard and again almost drowning. And that same mermaid that he saw as a child is now an adult, just like he is, and rescues him. And she's played by Daryl Hannah. And this is the end of Act 1 of the movie. And if it hadn't been for the Little Mermaid prologue at the beginning, I just want everyone to know, you may think Splash is a movie about a mermaid. The mermaid doesn't actually show up until like the very end of Act 1, really. Before that, it's all just Tom Hanks in New York City being like, oh, why can't I find a girlfriend? My heart's not in this fruit distribution business. And comic relief from John Candy. So then, like, Daryl Hannah rescues him, like, takes him up on the shore. He goes back to New York. She, like, finds a map in a shipwreck and swims to New York and shows up in New York City completely naked, or she was completely naked until Disney decided to censor her naked body through CGI hair that we'll talk more about later. And so she's wandering around wacky, hot, naked blonde lady in New York City and eventually gets connected with Tom Hanks, and they fall in infatuation with each other. She's hiding the fact that she's a mermaid in this version of mermaid mythology. When she goes on dry land, her tail disappears and she has human legs. And her tail only reappears if she gets wet, so she just doesn't get wet around him.
I wasn't gonna laugh at it, and then you started it.
I mean,
can you blame her?
Can you blame her? I mean, I like Tom Hanks now and everything, but he didn't have.
Alan kind of sucks.
Alan kind of sucks. So apparently she doesn't get wet around him, as we now all know. But Eugene Levy is also in this movie playing a scientist and a heavy. It's an odd role for him. And Sean looks like he has stuff to say about that.
No,
I thought he was good about it. Yeah,
I don't know if he's
him.
explicitly a cryptozoologist, but he's kind of a cryptozoologist. Fake animal scientist.
Yeah. And but anyway, I don't remember how, but he's on to Daryl Hannah's actually a mermaid, and he's following her around trying to spray water on her through various wacky scenarios. And at a certain point he does, and she grows a tail, and Tom Hanks as Alan is like horrified. And
you know how to say what he does. Eugene Levy gets her wet.
Eugene Levy gets Daryl Hannah playing Madison, who is named that because her actual name is like some fish sounds that nobody can say. And so even though the film doesn't think this is fucked up at all, they're just like, we're on Madison Avenue. Your name's Madison now because we can't pronounce your name, because that's not a dick move at all or anything. And anyway, so Eugene Levy gets Madison wet. Tom Hanks is horrified and whatever and goes away. And then she gets taken to some sort of lab. It's very The Shape of Water. They've got her in a tank, but then they take Tom Hanks there too because they want to do experiments on him too. And at a certain point, he's like, mermaid or not, I love you. And with the help of John Candy, they escape together. And the big twist on most Little Mermaid retellings I've seen is at the end, the happy ending. There is a happy ending. It doesn't have the traditional sad ending that such stories often do. But it's not that Madison stays in New York with Alan. It's that Alan ends up going under the sea with Madison, never to return again.
Until Splash 2, which exists.
I know, but not the same actors. So is that canon?
The lady who plays the secretary is the same actor.
I'm sorry, my bad. So then they live happily ever after together underwater, and it seems like it was no great loss for New York City. And Eugene Levy's like, oh, I shouldn't have tried to break up those crazy kids. Now I'm gonna help get her free as well, even though I caused this whole problem in the first place. And that's Splash, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else.
It's a magical ride. So the lure
Tell us about that one.
The Lure, or I was going to share this later, but I want to share it now, which is the original title, translates into something more like Daughters of Dancing or Daughters of Dance, which I'm just like, that's a better title. But regardless, The Lure is about two sisters, Golden and Silver, who are mermaids, who are sirens. Their whole thing is they lure people off of boats or off of the beach into the water, and they eat them until they see this quirky Polish singing family just hanging out and singing on the beach, and they think, hey, those guys are cool. Let's go play nightclubs with them. And so they join this quirky family. They start living with them. When they're on land, just like Daryl Hannah, they have legs. They, however, do not have assholes or vaginas or anything down there. They're like a Barbie doll.
We don't know how Daryl Hannah was. They wouldn't let us see.
This is true. They wouldn't let us see. But I think the implication of that, well, I don't know. You know what? I'm not going to get into whether or not Alan knows how it works down there.
We don't know. We don't know it.
So we don't know, but presumably she had parts. Well, these girls don't, and that's sort of a thing. They're sort of an oddity. And then, unlike Daryl Hannah,
they haven't, in their tails, though, they do.
They do in their tails, which is a thing that gets pointed out. And they don't hide it, which is unusual for most mermaid movies. It's just out there, and they're performing in the they're performing at the nightclub. Sometimes they got legs, and then they switch and they've got their tails, and their tails are these big eel, scaly, big spiky eel tails, which is again a little bit different. One of them, Golden, falls in love with the young, sort of self-involved son of in the family band, and she wants to stay there on land with him because she just loves him so. And she's warned by her sister and by a merman who's just been hanging out in Poland with his I guess it's just a metal punk band thing. I don't know exactly what genre that is, but pretty heavy. It's like if he doesn't love you, if he gets married to somebody else, and you don't kill him by dawn of the day that he gets married, the next day, you're going to turn into sea foam. And she's like, oh no, we're going to love each other. It's going to be great. To the point where she has her tail cut off and she gets some other girl's legs in a very sort of grotesque scene. And she learns to walk with us.
It's a musical number too.
Oh yeah, no, the whole film, the whole film is a big musical numbers throughout the whole thing, carrying the whole movie forward, which is wonderful. They're very colorful. They're very interesting. The way they do it's probably, I'm kind of critical of a lot of like musical things, and I think it's a really good way that they did it. Finally, idiot boy marries somebody else. I think a studio tech or something like that when they go to record a song, and she doesn't eat him, and she turns into foam on his body. They're hugging, so she turns into foam on his body, and so her sister rips out his throat and goes back into the sea, and that is a compressed version of The Lure. Because I can't really sing the parts, which would really be the only way to properly synopsize the movie, would be just at least sing parts of all the song.
We should have done a musical episode of this podcast where we sang our reactions.
I think all of them.
Well, ideas for season 2. So what are the connections between Splash and The Lure as you see them, Sean? Why we're talking about them here today?
Well, if it didn't already come through, basically they're both adaptations, variations on the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, The Little Mermaid. In some respects, like different ones are like the two of them are more or less faithful, and in different respects, each one is more or less faithful to the original in terms of like how it approaches it and where it puts its focus on, and I think that what we can do is we can come back here after a very brief ad break, and we can dive into how we feel about these films, and really dig into like how do these films compare not only to the adaptation, but just sort of the larger scope of where does the Little Mermaid kind of sit in this field of fairy tales and our culture, and how do these interact with that? I think we can address all that. But let's take a break for an ad. All right.
All right.
And we are back from advertising. It's so much fun.
So much fun.
I'm hungry.
I'm starving.
That only makes sense. That only makes
disgusted.
sense for Patreon people.
I had a lot to say, and then Cornbread Chair just ended me. And you don't know what the Cornbread Chair is or why it ended me unless you're our patron, and you're just gonna have to live with that, aren't you?
Have we said that we make up ads for the Patreon video? I don't think we have. I don't think we've said that on the show proper, where people who aren't patrons would go like, wait, there's a whole other thing on the video where you guys have these like hilarious made up ads. Yes, there is. There's just all sorts of secrets. There's secrets on Patreon.
Secrets and lies.
Mostly lies.
Find 10 lies, win a prize.
I mean, that's going to be easy. We lie a lot.
Well, we like giving away prizes. So
we do.
We also like talking about our general personal reactions to films.
We do. Would you like to start, or do you want me to jump in on?
Whatever, I'll start.
You go.
So I saw Splash as a kid. That was definitely an early VHS rental. When I was young, I wasn't allowed to see R-rated movies at first. So it was like, when stuff came in the video store that was like PG, and like that, probably got rented. We didn't used to have as many options once upon a time. Back in the time when we would actually like rent a VCR and then rent like a stack of VHS tapes. And that was the weekend. Yeah. Before we owned a VCR, we would rent one and rent like, probably all the Star Wars movies that were available and whatever. We can take a walk down memory lane some other time, but right now we're just walking down the Splash lane, so to speak. I definitely saw that on VHS. I think I saw it on TV as well. It was of interest to me because it was funny and there was a mermaid. All I really remembered about it from when I was a kid, besides that it starred Daryl Hannah and Tom Hanks and she was a mermaid and they fell in love, was the part where she goes to Bloomingdale's, Saks, Macy's. She goes to a New York City department store. I forget which one. And is hanging out and makes some high-pitched sounds that break all of the televisions. I remembered that. And I remembered the nudity because that made a big impression on me as a small child, because I was shocked and scandalized that there was a person, full-grown adult, just running around naked in front of God and everybody in a movie. Like, I just was like, how could somebody possibly do that? That must be the most embarrassing thing in the world. And my older sister told me that Daryl Hannah wasn't really naked. She was wearing a bodysuit. That when you thought you saw nudity in a movie, that person wasn't actually naked. They were wearing like a leotard that made them look naked, which sometimes is kind of the case, actually. But that was her butt. That wasn't a fake butt on top of her real butt. Anyway, so that's what I remembered of Splash. I liked it fine as a kid. It wasn't a favorite or anything like that. I liked it fine. I enjoyed rewatching it. I have various criticisms and bits of praise to dole out, as I will later. The Lure I saw in theaters. I saw it at IFC. Actually with a friend of the show, Janet Kim, who was here for Cage Fest 2. She was a person that I saw The Lure with.
She's
back
still
in the
a person.
Times. So far as we know. Let's the assumptions, Sean. You're really bringing the assumptions.
I mean, that's me.
Tense. Bring it down. Yeah, it's true. You are one to make an ass out of you, and
usually you as well.
Well, I suppose I walked into that one, we could say. So the lure I saw in the theater and like thought was delightful. I actually enjoyed it even more, I think, rewatching it for this show. And I want to buy the Blu-ray. There's a bunch of deleted scenes that I have not watched, but very much want to watch. I think The Lure is a fascinating movie, and I really appreciate the musical element, how it's done. It's unique. I think it works really well. Love it, but we'll talk more about it later. Sean, what are your personal experiences with these films?
Splash was something that we watched. I feel like I saw it a lot of times as a kid. I know I really enjoyed it as a kid. I can't remember until watching it today. I don't remember the last time I saw it. So it's probably been 20, 25 years at least, maybe closer to 30 since I've seen it. But I really loved it as a kid. I was like, oh, Splash, it's a sweet movie. It's a fun movie. When I heard about them remaking it, I thought, oh, okay, that kind of works. I know they wanted to do it with like Channing Tatum as the merman or something. Rewatching it was an interesting experience. That was a movie. The Lure, on the other hand, I saw it when it was I think I also saw it at IFC. I think that's where it's playing here. And a friend of ours invited my wife, Jess, and I to go see it with them, and loved it pretty much immediately. And I think basically as soon as it like turns to them like singing and stuff, I'm like, this movie is amazing and I love it. This is perfect. Watched it again for this, loved it even more. I think it's, as I was saying, the original title is translated to something like Daughters of Dancing or Daughters of Dance. I don't know Polish, but that's what the translator told me. I'm like, can that be the name? I like The Lure is fine as a name, but I kind of like the whole, I don't know. I kind of like the 80s, 70s vibe of calling it like Daughters of Dance, which fits the movie, I think, a little bit better. But that's a different conversation. I really like the tonal mix in the movie because it is a horror movie, but it is also very much sort of a romance, like a tragic sort of romance. But it's also very bright and very shiny and very sort of, I don't know the word I'm looking for is, but it's bright and shiny. It is also a horror movie, but it's not like it's not any one of these things very, very clearly. It's not very, even as a musical, it plays with that a little bit, just with like the content and the tone. And I think that's one of the things I really like about it.
Yeah, I think much like the last, like Parasite, which we talked about on the last episode, it doesn't cleanly fit into any genre. It has elements of a bunch of different genres and bends and twists them and doesn't necessarily conform to what your expectations would be of any of the things it's drawing from, for sure. So very quickly, before we go deeper into, our thoughts and some of the analysis we've read about it, how they both relate to the Little Mermaid fairy tale source material and all that, those were our thoughts, but kind of general critical and audience responses to the degree that we can gauge such things. The Lure got good reviews. It's like 88% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, 73% audiences, which makes sense because it's a weird ass film. There are people who are going to see this movie and be like, the fuck was that? Like, Splash, weirdly, on Rotten Tomatoes is 91% fresh critics, which I think speaks to the fact that it's a well pre-Rotten Tomatoes film that only has limited selected critics' reviews getting factored into that score. I would say, as somebody who was alive, albeit a small child when this film was released, I don't think it got terrible reviews overall or anything, but it was hardly like universally acclaimed. And the Rotten Tomatoes audience rating is 58%, which I don't quite know what to make of, except again, Rotten Tomatoes is less of a valuable resource when you are talking about older films. I don't usually think of 84 as a particularly older film, but in Rotten Tomatoes years, it is. In terms of more specific examples, we often turn to Ebert. Ebert gave Splash 1.5 stars, saying there's a funny movie lurking around the edges of Splash, and sometimes it even sneaks on screen and makes us smile. It's too bad the relentlessly conventional minds that made this movie couldn't have made the leap from sitcom to comedy, which I feel like is pretty harsh, Ebert, but not entirely.
He's not wrong.
He's not wrong.
He's not wrong.
And I believe, unfortunately, Ebert had passed away by the time The Lure came out, but on his website, which lives on, one of the critics writing for that now gave The Lure 2.5 stars, saying it's a Polish musical about man-eating teenage mermaids and genuinely weird. That's not a comment on the film's unabashedly freaky subject matter, but also a half-hearted complaint about the filmmaker's off-kilter execution.
Well, that person's a dumbass.
It's like, it's just like, sorry.
I'm sorry you don't like things that are good.
Exactly.
I think this is like the most hostile I'm going to be with you.
Yeah, Sean's pissed. I'm
like, that was a great movie. I'm sorry you're an idiot.
And then the New York Times, A.O. Scott in the Times was more positive, but he was even like, as folkloric Polish musical sex comedy horror movies go, The Lure is pretty interesting. I think he just didn't know what to make of it. He's like, there's stuff here. It's not.
Which is honest, when reviewers respond to movies that they're like, I don't know what to make of this with I guess this is a thing. I'm like, you don't know what to make of it, which means somebody actually did something. They actually did a thing, and it's not just the same shit over and again. Why are you not happy about that? Especially as a reviewer who has to watch the same fucking movie 20,000 times. As much as I love movies I love the Marvel movies. We're rewatching the Marvel movies right now. And they are very samey, but yeah, you gotta watch the same shit over again. Somebody did something new and interesting. Fuck you. Love it.
You need a varied diet, It's like Marvel movies are Marvel movies. They're like potato chips or whatever, macaroni and cheese, like a thing that maybe you love and is delicious and is kind of homogenous. And you're very happy to eat it pretty regularly, but you also need to eat other things or...
Yeah.
Yeah,
you need the variety.
Orange.
They're giving you variety. Why are you being so weird? God. I'm talking to you like you're A.O. Scott. You're A.O. Scott now. Sorry.
I make a lot more money now and and have a much bigger platform for my thoughts on film. Amazing. The Times, Janet Maslin, who we quoted last time around also, who hated Surviving the Game, a film we talked about with Parasite last episode. She liked Splash more and said it could have been shorter. True. But it probably couldn't have been much sweeter. Only purists will quibble with the blissfully happy ending. I did like the ending, to be fair.
I don't have a problem with the ending. And this kind of goes into everything else that we'll talk about a little bit, but if you're doing a Little Mermaid adaptation in film, most of them have this changed up happy ending. Most of them are they get together in the end.
Yeah.
So it's no, I don't have a problem with that. I didn't know that there wasn't a happy ending until, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, well after being aware of the story in general.
Yeah.
So in terms of box office and awards, though, The Lure has tons of film festival awards, which is great. It was recognized, or at least nominations. Meanwhile, somehow, by some miracle of some fucking miracle, Splash was nominated for Best Original Screenplay at the Oscars, and
Oscars are trash.
That's
That's
true.
All that is.
It's true. Although this was the same year that Amadeus wins a bunch of awards, and in fairness, that's a great movie. But
I mean, Oscars being trash doesn't mean that good films never get rewarded.
That's
Sometimes
true.
they even get rewarded in the Best Screenplay category.
That's true.
Occasionally, Get Out.
Yeah. I mean, Splash didn't win, but it was nominated. So I'm like, how bad were the screenplays that year? Because this is not a good screenplay. Was it did Penthouse get a vote? Is that what it was?
You know how the screenplay Oscars are, though. People are like, oh, it's a mermaid. Whoa, how creative. Let's give it a screenplay award.
Yeah. Well, just like how the acting award always goes to the most acting.
Yeah.
Well, he did the most acting. He did the absolute most of the acting and lost 400 pounds for the role.
There was the most accents. There was the most prosthetics. There was the most weight and other body change.
This is what Connery never won because he just refused to ever do a different accent. He's like, I'm Scottish. I'm doing my Scottish accent. Okay, but you're playing a Russian submarine commander. He's a Scottish Russian submarine commander, even when he's speaking Russian. Okay, calm down.
You know, having just seen that film, The Comfort of Strangers, with Christopher Walken's on again, off again Italian accent, I really respect that. And I think it would be better if more actors were just like, you know what? No.
That was more the standard before, too. Like, until what, like the 70s, people didn't do accents. You hired the actor and then they just used their voice. You know?
Because they all had that, like, Mid-Atlantic or whatever, like...
They're all Cary Grant.
Acting school actor accent. That, like, golden age of Hollywood accent they all had. But yeah, I was horrified to see that Splash, which a film I do not think is terrible.
No, not at all.
I think it's particularly good.
No. Like,
and I definitely don't think the screenplay is what makes it good.
No.
So in terms of, you know, what these films have in common, as Sean discussed earlier, they both engage with and adapt The Little Mermaid and are both faithful to the Hans Christian Andersen source material in some respects and tweak it and change it in others. Splash obviously gender swaps the protagonist. Doesn't gender swap the mermaid, but like The Little Mermaid's the protagonist. It's her story. Splash is Alan's story.
Right.
And the mermaid's his love interest, which is like, to me, it was both kind of like, wow, you're going to try to turn The Little Mermaid into a romantic comedy and your innovation is to make it the dude's story instead of the mermaid's story. That's great.
Yeah, but you don't understand. He's a dude who doesn't know if he can love.
He's a dude, at least, who hasn't found the right woman yet, which I'm like, yeah, there is no right woman because... And
that's not true. That's not true. The right woman is Daryl Hannah.
But she's a mermaid.
No. I mean Daryl Hannah. Just Daryl Hannah.
Interesting. So in addition to this protagonist swap, where the man that the mermaid is fixated on is the protagonist, but it's still got the mermaid, fixated on the guy and like pursuing him. Like it's all following the Little Mermaid story. There's no sea witch who like helps her get legs. No. It's just like worked into the mythology that she can temporarily have legs. That's kind of the nod to the source material. It's not, okay, but you got to make him love you because otherwise you turn into sea foam unless your sisters give you this like cursed dagger that you kill him with. There's no like killing Alan, but there is this thing of she's like, I have a week and then I need to go back. Yeah. And I can never return to land again. We don't know why. It's very like a talking cat level mythology building in terms of the rules of the world, honestly.
She also appears to be the only mermaid.
Although supposedly she has like...
Oh, wait, no, I'm wrong. You're right. Sorry, I interrupted you. Apologies.
No, it's fine. But we don't see other mermaids.
No, but we do see that there's like some city at the end.
Yeah, we see that she has a society. I think it's a little... bit of a missed opportunity that like I don't know, it's just they don't care about building her world or context. No. She is just like the sexy innocent is like all she is, and I think Daryl Hannah does a good job with the role, frankly, but it's not a very
that was her role in everything in the 80s. Like Blade Runner, this Clan of the Cave Bear. Like that was like, we need a sexy innocent. Is Daryl Hannah doing anything? No, she's free. All right, we're good.
Great. Yeah, Splash has a happy ending, which is pretty contrary to the source material of the fairy tale. She dies at the end. She turns into sea foam. But it's pretty normal to, like we were discussing, to change the ending to be something happy. That's Disney obviously does that too. I assume they'll do that in their live action adaptation of The Little Mermaid that they're doing right now as well. Like that's a pretty common.
Well, yeah, I mean that's just going to be their cartoon turned into a live action, right? I mean, just like the only one that I've seen of those so far is Beauty and the Beast, and I was like, what was the point of watching a not as good version where Emma Watson is like, who's normally fine, like not great, not my favorite, but Emma Watson is just sort of wandering through the scenes.
Yeah, the only reason to watch that shit is the beautiful animation, honestly. I'm not a big fan of the Disney Beauty and the Beast, but it is gorgeous.
Oh, it's an incredible technical achievement. Like,
yeah, I'll watch any of those Disney animations. Like, just on a technical level, they're gorgeous and worth watching for that. But like the I've been meaning to see the Lion King one, to be fair, just because like the cast. But I'm
offended. It's called live action.
That I was baffled when I first saw like footage, and I was like, wait, this is what?
The whole thing's CGI. They don't even take actual. I mean, I don't think they should have taken actual animals. But they don't even take actual animals, and a lot of the environments are CGI generated too. And just like, this is not a live action movie. This is a 3D animated version of the film. The only reason you're categorizing it as such, or as different, is because I don't know, they want it for awards
realistic
things or something like that. I'm like, no, it's a different animation. It's nonsense. But
100% with you. But the lore. The lore changes The Little Mermaid because, well, the Little Mermaid original story, she has a bunch of sisters, but they're not like coming up on land with her and being part of her story like that. And so the lore has 2 mermaids. And I actually have a question. Who would you say is the protagonist of the lore?
I don't think it's this is one of those situations where I don't think it cleanly fits into, and I think this is one of the reasons I like it. I think this is one of the reasons why some of the reactions by reviewers are confused, because, and by other people, I think, you see some people's reactions to it, I think it's confused just because it's like, well, who's the one person I'm following? And there is no one person. You're following the both of them. The both of them have an arc. The family has an arc. Like, everybody kind of has an arc in this movie. A little bit of an arc. Some people just have like a short one. But like, in a lot of ways, it's much better storytelling because it's not just, oh, well, you follow this one person and they have a thing. And it's like, it's not the plug and play thing exactly, even though it totally fits like a typical 3-act structure. And you could totally plug in like the typical things that we teach when we teach screenwriting. But like, it's both sisters. It's Silver and Golden, and they all want different things as well. And they have different experiences in this world, starting from the same point. They're kind of parallel stories. And
their relationship is the anchor of the whole film.
Yes.
Also.
That's really what we're following through the film. While it does replicate the story with Golden's story, it's replicating the story of the Little Mermaid. Like, it's really the relationship between the 2 sisters, and that's where the conflict is. And the conflict is like, oh, we're hanging out here until we go to America. And then it's like, don't fall in love with this guy. Otherwise, you're going to have to kill him. Like, literally up front, it's like, here is what the conflict is. We want to go to America, but you are probably going to fall in love with this guy. And if you fall in love with this guy, you're going to have to kill him. And she says, I'm not going to do that. And she says,
because they're teenagers.
Exactly. And also, he's a teenager. And yeah, he deserves to die. But like, that's just because everybody does.
I love Polish Evan Peters is how I think of him. I don't know his name, but he looks like Evan Peters. And I love that he's just like this guy at the nightclub, right? He's like a young person in this kind of like seedy nightlife realm where most of the people he's interacting with are also a lot older than him.
Yeah.
Of another generation. And it makes perfect sense that like, oh, these 2 hot like girls who are my age are here. Of course they're going to have like some kind of teenage infatuation. I love that the film from the jump doesn't try to pretend that this is some sort of like genuine true love that like should win. It's just like, yeah, you've got teenagers, they're going to catch feelings. And then when stuff gets complicated, he's going to go off to the next young lady who's there and doesn't have a tail and doesn't make him confront himself with like how he's like, oh, it's kind of weird that like I've got the hots for this lady, but she's not really a lady. She's a fish. And that's kind of hot, but also makes me feel uncomfortable. And I'm way too young and dumb to like process any of this. So I'm just going to go to this other lady over here and leave her with a broken heart, blissfully unaware of the fact that that means there's a good chance I'm going to get my throat ripped out by, her or her sister. So the lore also does deviate from the Little Mermaid in that kind of like siren people killing element of mermaid lore is not part of the Hans Christian Andersen tale, but it is part of the mythology that the Hans Christian Andersen tale like is drawing from in terms of like mermaids as mythological creatures, right? So it's like bringing in some of that external mermaid mythology. But aside from that, it does stick pretty closely to the original Little Mermaid story. You could even almost see like there's no sea witch the way there is in like the Disney adaptation, and in the Hans Christian Andersen story, the sea witch is also absent from Splash. You could argue that the woman who's kind of a maternal figure.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The mother of the teen boy who's in the band. Like, she has kind of that...
kind of plays that role.
Kind of enough.
Ish.
Enough. And definitely like the way that would work for an adaptation, but yeah.
Because in the lore, unlike in Splash, it's not like... well, like Sean was saying, like they come up on land, they have human legs, but they don't have like genitals. They don't look just like a person. And in order to be fully like anatomically human, Golden has to go through like this weirdo, like, you know, face-off-esque, sketchy, like experimental surgery that I believe that her like nightclub mom helps set up for her, right?
Yeah, I
think
think
so. The sea witch in the Little Mermaid source material is the one who's like, okay, well, you can have legs when you go up on land. I'm gonna help you do that and like learn how to be like a imitation of a person. And their kind of like nightclub mom kind of does that too, both through facilitating the surgery as well as kind of being like, I'm going to teach you how to do a nightclub act. I'm going to teach you how to perform. I'm going to teach you how to like, you know, be on stage doing the like sexy lady thing. Yeah. Or whatever. So that's, you know, a piece of continuity there. And of course the ending. Yeah. The prince doesn't get his throat ripped out by a different mermaid in the source material, but the Little Mermaid does turn into foam. In the source material, there's some sort of like kind of Christian energy there, suggesting that her soul can still be redeemed because like she didn't kill him, and that sort of like Christian moralizing is completely absent in the lore. I would say that is not a piece of it, but the plot does still pretty closely follow what happens in the source material, I think, which is interesting.
One of the things in terms of adaptations, which I think about a lot, because when this relates to the brief divergence I had a little bit ago when I was complaining with the reviewers. As I said, we're rewatching the Marvel movies, so I'm thinking more about adaptation in that sense, in the sense of that even when in those movies they take the title from a story starring the characters, it's never actually an adaptation of that story. They kind of take the essence of it. And all of these stories, all of these movies in there, they're all like, here's what we think, here's like the essence of this character, and then it's a new story. It's a different story. I think that we have something similar here. Two different adaptations. I think from a looking at adaptation standpoint, Splash is in some respects, with some plot divergences, it is still relatively faithful to like the arc. Like the end is different, but like the arc of the story is a little bit closer. They drop some elements, but it's like she comes on, she pursues him, they fall in love, and then they just change the end, more or less. And it has kind of that like feel to it. She has legs, but she's hiding it from him. Like in the original story, in the Little Mermaid story, he doesn't know that she's a mermaid, right? Am I remembering that wrong? So. Yeah, because I think that's kind of core to it, is usually he doesn't know. So it hews to that more closely. I think that the lure, while there are other themes that are happening, maybe this one is on accident in the original Little Mermaid story, but I think the lure hews a little more closely to at least a part of the story, or an essence of the story, which is perhaps... or a way to interpret the story, which is a way that I think after I learned that she like dies in the story, I started rethinking that story, which is that women give up themselves in a lot of ways for men. And like, the question being, is that worth it? I don't know if Hans Christian Andersen meant that, but I think it's a way to read The Little Mermaid, the original story. She surrenders her life. She surrenders things that make her special. to be normal for a guy, and then he doesn't acknowledge the value of that, and then she dies. And the lure is very much the same. And the lure builds it up in an interesting way too, because her giving up her legs isn't the first thing she gives up to him. She does the little scale, like she gives of her body very early on, and there's at one point, like when we see very clearly, it's wonderful visual in the film when we see very clearly that he has dismissed and given up that sacrifice. We see like the scale drop and like it flush down a shower or something like that. And I think that there's kind of some thematic, a little bit more of a thematic faithfulness in the lure. Not just the end is the same, but just sort of that like sacrifice to someone who doesn't appreciate the sacrifice.
Yeah. And when I was a kid, I liked the story The Little Mermaid a lot. I had a little, 3-inch tall replica of the statue that's in Denmark of the Little Mermaid, where her legs are like kind of turning into a fishtail, but also kind of look like human legs. My parents gave it to me. I don't know where they got it, but I had that in my room. And I liked the story a lot. I liked it because it had an unhappy ending. And I think when I was young, I kind of thought stuff that had an unhappy ending was deep, because I was like a little, much like I am today. I was always like this. And as a kid, I was like, that's how it is. Real life doesn't have fucking happy endings. Real life has like, you take this, like, you roll the dice for this guy, and then at the end, he doesn't appreciate it, and you turn into sea foam. And it made me sad, but I liked feeling something. I don't know. Right. Like I liked sad stuff as a kid. I was very attracted to it. I'm
sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's fine. But I just, to say that, like, I think the lore, I agree with what you're saying. I feel like the lore in many respects is very true in certain ways to the source material. It's similarly tragic. It's a sad ending. It's a slightly different sad ending, but it's a sad ending. I think the perspective it's coming from and what it thinks about the film, what it thinks about the material, is very different. I think Hans Christian Andersen was telling a Christian morality tale about sacrifice that inscribed a lot of like ideas about gender and things like that, that the lore, whose director I am, Smazinska?
Let's say it's Smazinska and then be wrong.
I'm sure that we are wrong, dear listeners, but what is it? Agnes? It's something that starts with an A.
It is Agnes, but I don't think it's Agnes. It has more letters.
Agnesta. It's a very long name that starts with A. It's a long Polish name that Sean and I are butchering, and we apologize.
We probably should have looked.
We should definitely have looked it up, but maybe we'll do a drop later and try our best to pronounce it.
A drop that explicitly says, and Sean and Nicole are assholes and didn't look up a Polish person's name, which would have been really easy to do. Actually, I take that back. It may have been actually really hard to get the pronunciation, because if you remember, I can't remember if I told you this, but I was supposed to say some word for your wedding when I was doing the like saying we're going to do this thing next. Yeah, in Hebrew, I couldn't find like a reliable
transliteration.
I just couldn't find even online, like YouTube. Like there was like a bunch of like, here's how you say this, and a lot of them seemed wrong. So I'd ask your dad.
That was a good person to ask.
Yeah, it was like there. I was like, hey, how do I say this word?
Hopefully, he told you something.
He did.
Correct.
I think I said it right.
I don't remember.
But I don't think we'll find her. My point being, I don't think we'll find her name. It's pronounced right unless we find like some Polish like interview show or something like that that's entirely in Polish and just wait for them to say her name.
This is true. Which we should have done as well.
We should have done a lot of.
There's so many. What we should have done, Sean, could fill many podcasts.
Whew.
But so the extremely talented director we're both such fans of, who directed The Lure, whose name we don't know how to pronounce, I believe she kind of is coming at this material from a little bit of a different perspective than Hans Christian Andersen. Because, one, I think she's more interested in relationships between women than Hans Christian Andersen was. I think Hans Christian Andersen sees some sort of like nobility in the Little Mermaid's pretty ignorant love for the first dumb dude she sees, whereas I think The Lure has like a little bit more of a cynical perspective on that. Empathetic.
Yeah.
I think it's super empathetic, but it knows that this is teenage infatuation that's not going to end well.
Yeah.
The Little Mermaid source material is very sympathetic to the prince. I don't think this film is particularly sympathetic to Polish Evan Peters. He's like, it's not like super demonizing of him, but it's like he's announcing that he's a dick very early on, and she's not wanting to see it in a way that's very realistic, I think, to how teenagers are.
I mean, it's how a lot of people are. I mean, I think we want to say teenagers, but I think we all know people who we might unfairly say should know better. But like, I've seen plenty of adults where it's like, okay, but that guy sucks. Yeah, but I think you're right. I think one of the things about the movie that is good is that it is nuanced. He is not evil. He is just selfish, and he is never he's never really trying to be like, oh, like I'm trying to get her, and then he discards her. Like that's never really his thing. She wants him, and he kind of goes with it.
Because they're there.
Yeah. And
they're just both there. They work together.
Yeah.
And so he's very happy to flirt with her, but he's telling her from early on, like, yeah, I'm kind of grossed out on how you're a fish. And she's just like, oh, I feel kind of bad about myself now. How can I change to make this asshole happy? I think maybe you pulled this quote from this article, Deep Cuts on The Lure.
From the sci-fi.com, yeah.
Yeah, from sci-fi.com, which talks about how, The Lure is a cautionary tale about giving yourself up in pursuit of a man, whereas the Little Mermaid fairy tale is kind of like an instructional on, yes, you should give yourself up for a man. That is the good Christian thing to do, and then patiently wait and be sea foam in the hopes that someday you'll get into heaven.
Yeah.
Like that, same story, different takeaways.
Yeah.
Whereas Splash tries to just sidestep all that messiness and just be like, hey, mermaid and a guy in love, and he gets to just like literally swim away from all his problems, never has to grow up, never has to like deal with his shit and learn how to have relationships with other people or figure out what he's good at or feels passionately about. Like Splash is an odd movie in that like the lesson is like, yeah, fuck it, just escape, just jump overboard, go live with the mermaids. Life is too hard. Who wants to figure out relationships or careers or passions or, existential dread or any of that? Like, let's just go swim away.
It's got a point.
I'm not saying it doesn't.
It's got a point. I would also like to swim away. Although I don't really swim. I mean, it's been a really long time.
I'd be freaked out being underwater that long.
I don't like being underwater. It's one of the reasons why I never really swam very much.
It's interesting that not only does he become part of her world instead of her permanently becoming part of his world, but he's the one who, while they don't make it explicit, he's the one who has to go through some sort of permanent physical transformation because he's breathing underwater.
Yeah, but it's not a dramatic. It's not a dramatic transformation. Well, now if he had a tail coming, it would be like what happens with her, where it just happens, right? Now, for budgetary reasons, I'm sure that's why he doesn't have it. But like, I think in context of the story that we have seen, I would argue that he's never going to have a tail. He's going to be a merman with his merman legs, and a merman penis, but never going to have a fish, never going to be part fish. I think he doesn't actually lose any. He doesn't give up anything really. His life doesn't work. All he has is his brother who's fine with this, and a business that is fine. Like his brother seems to be handling it like not well, but like something's going on there. So he's not losing anything, and he's not being changed by it. He just gets to go off, and
he gets to not really have an arc. The only arc he has is getting over his knee-jerk, she's a mermaid. That's like the only growth he has. Otherwise, he's just like, man, my life sucks. I don't really know what to do. And then it's like, man, well, I could just avoid my whole sucky life by like just swimming away with this mermaid.
And in a lot of ways, it's just the same thing. It is the same thing as the Little Mermaid, because again, he doesn't learn anything in the Little Mermaid. It's all about him. It's all about what he gets. It's all about what he's supposed to receive.
You mean the prince in the Little Mermaid?
Yeah,
story?
the prince in Little Mermaid and Alan. It's all about like, no, he gets the girl, or in the prince, he wants something else, so he's not going to get the girl. Yeah.
It's part of why it's so like offensive to me that it was nominated for best screenplay, because I'm just like, this is a pretty kind of lazy screenplay. This is high concept, like it's going to be funny. She's going to be a mermaid. She's going to get into wacky hijinks in New York City. And then it's going to be like an ET thing where like she gets like taken to be experimented on, and then they're going to have to break her out and it'll live under the sea. It'll be great.
Yeah. And it's like on its own, like as a summary of a plot, I'm like, okay, that could be a good movie.
It's perfectly
but it lacks
serviceable.
It lacks all of the meat. It lacks all of the character development, the way, like, he really doesn't develop. It actually kind of would have been more interesting if it had been Freddy. If Freddy had to go from like being whatever the fuck Freddy is, pervert, weirdo,
That's what
creep.
Ebert said. Did you read the full review?
Yeah. Well, no, what I read was that what he thought is the casting should be the opposite.
Yeah, but I thought he also was saying that the characters should have kind of stayed the same, and that like John Candy still should have been the kind of like,
oh, okay, I didn't see that part, but
cruder, like more boisterous, larger personality, and Tom Hanks the brother should have been like the straight-laced foil, and they should have let like the loud dude be the love interest.
I think that might have been more interesting. So like, just because there was something for him to learn. And really what he doesn't really learn it. He's like, oh, I don't think I love anything. And then he's like, he falls in love, and that's it.
She doesn't like teach him to loosen up. She doesn't like help him find a passion.
No.
She doesn't help him connect with other people. He doesn't get anything else other than the relationship.
He's not even afraid of the water. Sorry for talking over you.
No, it's a good point. He doesn't even have to get over that and be like, I'm going to do it, because that could be a big dramatic moment where he overcomes his fear of swimming or whatever.
Which is that's the easy one. It's like, oh yeah, and he doesn't like it. He's in love with a fish and he doesn't like the water. This could be really easy. No, I mean, it's, as we were kind of alluding to, discussing a little bit, like the Oscars and screenplay and best screenplay and all that stuff. It's often not like smart movies.
No.
Not to go off, but I didn't really like the movie when I saw it. But I hated it when I had to read it for screenplay class, and I'm mad that Good Will Hunting exists as a movie.
I can't even.
That script is just fucking terrible.
Here's what I remember from. I haven't seen it in a long time. And it won best screenplay. Oh, I recall. I liked it a lot when it came out. I'm not going to disagree with you. I haven't seen it in a million years, because all I remember from Good Will Hunting is feeling emotional when like Robin Williams as Will Hunting's shrink or whatever is like, abuse you suffered isn't your fault. Mm-hmm. I was like, I feel feelings. There was some stuff in that relationship that made me feel feelings. I liked it when he mentioned Howard Zinn. And also, as you may recall, it's like wall-to-wall Elliott Smith songs on that soundtrack. I
wasn't aware of it, but yeah.
Well, it is. That's why he was nominated for an Oscar, which was a very, very strange thing at the time for me to have happened. That all of a sudden, this person who previously like very few people gave a shit about, and I was like going to see play like constantly on the Lower East Side, suddenly was like at the Oscars, and that was Very strange.
Yeah.
And I love that song. I mean, as many people know, big Elliott Smith fan, so goes a long way when there's a lot of his shit on the soundtrack. Can't really speak for the quality of the film otherwise. I would not be surprised if Matt Damon and Ben Affleck did not actually put together the best screenplay of the year. I would not be shocked by that. Let's get into the lore and Splash and their attitudes towards sexuality, which is kind of a big part of both of those stories, as well as I would say the Little Mermaid fairy tale as well, although that's a lot more kind of like literally repressed in the Little Mermaid story. They're not talking about it explicitly.
There was an interesting thing that I think relates to the lure, but we had an article that we looked up that was on Smithsonian that was arguing that the Disney Little Mermaid is like a subversive film. And there's a lot of stuff in there that's worth maybe dissecting, but like not maybe right now. But one thing that I pulled from it was that the overall lesson, and this is specifically referring to in the Little Mermaid, the animated film, the Disney film, when Ursula is teaching Ariel, like, here's how you be a lady. The overall lesson, being a woman in a man's world, is all about putting on a show. You are in control. You control the show. I thought that was interesting when I was reading that, because we were kind of looking at a couple of things about Little Mermaid and adaptations of The Little Mermaid. And I think that this one in particular really fit well with The Lure, because right away they go straight into, even though they're not hiding, which is part of almost every adaptation of The Little Mermaid, Madison is putting on a show, pretending to be a woman on land. In The Lure, it becomes a much more like literal performance. Like, we are on stage and we're doing all these different songs and all of that. And I thought it's an interesting component to really every version of The Little Mermaid.
Yeah, it's interesting because I might have mentioned to you, after watching these films for this show, my first thought was, wow, I would really like to see a story about mermaids that isn't an adaptation of The Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
I would really like to see a mermaid story that isn't about a mermaid's relationship to some dude she's in love with and, messages about female sexuality, basically. Yeah. Around, like, there's other stuff. There's other stuff. And I think The Lure is great. I love The Lure. I think it was a useful intervention, a useful retelling of this story that, as I've said, I do feel a connection to of sorts, for better or worse. In a lot of ways, I think it's a fucked up story to, read to small children without doing a lot of kind of like breaking down an analysis of it. But, that ship has clearly sailed with me. So it's not a criticism of it, but it's just, there are other things. And like The Lure very much does, I think, talk, this performance of femininity thing. And that one is interesting because, like you said, Silver and Golden are not hiding. They're not pretending not to be mermaids. In fact, they're using the fact that they are as a shtick in part of their nightclub act. Not every single time. But sometimes they'll do a thing where like they're on stage and they're singing and they have legs, and then like they go get in a giant like champagne glass full of water, and then they grow tails and everybody's like, oh, how delightful. And I'm not clear on whether the audience thinks it's a special effect or whether the audience is like, oh no, they're real. The sense I get is that it's some of each, that humanity, some people are aware of the fact that there are mer people, some are not. There's Triton, the merman, who's also part of the nightclub scene in this film. Presumably some people who know him know what his deal is. He's had his horns removed. Like, he has these like gnarly scars on his forehead because he's undergone surgery to look more human, although he also insists that he's not there permanently, that he can go back anytime.
Well, one was specifically removed by somebody else, and then he ripped the other one out, is what he said.
Yeah,
like, so a fisherman pulled one out, and then he got the other one out.
Right. Which I like, because it also doesn't put 100% of like the potential mutilation or body modification on, female coded bodies. It's like a part of like being of the sea. And you get a lot more sense in The Lure of a rich world beneath the sea, than you do in Splash.
Yeah.
Yeah, part of it just it makes me feel tired.
Yeah.
It just makes me feel tired. I'm tired of stories by men trying to like say something about femininity and performance, and I don't know. This may be me. This may be my own relationship to my own gender and feelings about it and stuff like this. But a lot of it, I'm like, yes, gender is a performance. And I'm the first person to say that. But like, oh, and in the Little Mermaid, she learned, like in the Disney version, she learns whatever, and ergo it's subversive. And I'm kind of like,
I think
how about we just make a different movie and have a subversive movie? Like, I'm not saying there aren't subversive things in Disney movies, but to be like, actually, it's a feminist, blah, blah, blah. Just makes me tired. It's not.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like those readings usually because those readings are like, oh no, this movie's more nuanced. And then they insist that the movie is that thing. And it's like, no, your reading of it needs to be more nuanced. That there is a reading of this movie. There are readings of these scenes that work for that. However, the films generally do not,
No.
beyond some limitations. I think one of the things that's like the whole gender, gender is performance, that's like one thing, but the whole, very specifically, women, femininity as a performance is this pervasive and at times very toxic issue, not because it's necessarily wrong, but because of how it's weaponized against women. Because you see it in the reactions of like incels online, and they're the people who aren't necessarily that far gone, maybe not necessarily not that far gone, but not necessarily explicitly that group, but around that group, who, for example, like their dismissal or hating on makeup, which is like a whole thing that comes back every couple of years, becomes a thing again. There's another little group of shitty men who are like, ugh, makeup, I like women natural, blah 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 blah. Like,
but
there's
what
this
they mean by that is they mostly want women who do natural look makeup, because none of those dudes have any fucking idea what makeup actually does or doesn't do.
Exactly. And they do like this whole thing, oh, it's like a lie, it's a lie, and it's that I know you don't, but like it's, I think that this is related to that, like this whole like trope of femininity as a performance. I think it gets weaponized against women. I think it becomes a thing that gets weaponized against trans people
for
as
sure.
well, because it's like, oh no, it's a performance, and you're acting like also, femininity isn't a real thing. It's just something that you pretend to do.
Well, I mean, that's because at the end of the day, from my perspective, there is no there. It's not that there is some sort of essential, pure, true femininity that, cis women have.
Yes.
And, there's a million ways to be a woman.
Yeah.
There's a million different flavors of femininity. There's a million ways to blend it with other sorts of gender expression. And the idea that it's like there's some real thing that a woman is and the performance is somehow artificial. It's like, no, the performance is all there is.
Yeah.
There's this category called woman. There's a million different ways. There's infinity ways to perform it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, that's all it is. There's no true thing that a woman is.
Yes.
You're never going to get to that authenticity that fucking incel idiots fetishize. And it doesn't exist. It's another like made up fairy tale thing, like whatever fucking Lord of the Rings shit they're into. I don't know. Do incels like Lord of the Rings? I'm not up on it recently, but because it's like masculinity is a performance too.
But that's not used that way. It's not acknowledged that way, right?
But that's part of why I think it's helpful to analyze it that way and turn the spot. That's one of the reasons why, like, I love the movie American Psycho so much, and I love a lot of these films that are about like looking at and analyzing performances of masculinity and being like, look at this artificiality here. This is not neutral or true, and femininity is artifice. Like, it's all artifice. It's all performance. Like, just fucking chill the fuck out. Let people be how they are and stop getting mad. If you don't like somebody's lipstick, great. Don't date that person.
Yeah.
Like, very, very easy fixes here. Don't date people you don't like. Don't try to change people to become somebody that you want to date. None of that works. We've all seen that movie called
Vertigo.
Life. Yeah. Potential future episode of the Celluloid Mirror. But I wanted to pick up though.
Well, no, I just to tag onto that point slightly, and then definitely. But like, I think that part of the problem, I'm agreeing with you, is definitely that part of the problem with retelling the Little Mermaid the way that we're retelling the Little Mermaid is it only interfaces with femininity as a performance, and it never interfaces with masculinity as a performance, which is also probably why this whole idea of redoing Splash, but with Channing Tatum as a merman, won't work.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think it's like they could have done that in Splash.
Mm-hmm.
Splash actually could have flipped that around a little bit, and it could have been about Tom Hanks's performance of like a disgruntled, yuppie or whatever. Like you could have gone there, but the movie like isn't even aware that that's a place it could go.
Yeah, well, culturally we don't acknowledge on a large scale. Like when we sit down, we talk about it, we acknowledge it. But when we don't acknowledge on a large scale that masculinity is a performance, because we like the phrase like a real man or something like that is very ingrained manly in that sense. Like femininity is even like traditionally it's a performance.
Well, because that's the thing about patriarchy, right? Is like masculinity is neutral and normal.
Mm-hmm.
Femininity is like that extra thing that exists only in relation to the masculine norm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's, and also patriarchy is men get to decide what women are, and women need to adapt, which is a lot of what The Little Mermaid is about, right? Is about like women adapting, because obviously it's not a question whether or not you want to be with a man. Of course you want to be with a man. That's natural.
Right.
And what God wants. And so
even if you're a fish, you want to be with a man.
Even if you're a fish, one could argue that that's actually a very ungodly. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not. Sean, did you know I'm not the person who should be walking us through like what the Bible has to say about people and fish and doing it? What, the Christian Bible at least?
Hey, Jesus made fishes. So I don't know what he did with those fishes, but he made some people some fishes. Just saying.
Those people were liking getting those fishes.
Yeah.
But bringing it back to what we were talking about like sexuality in these films.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned, so in terms of corporate conglomeration and ownership, Splash is a Disney film now, at least.
No, always was.
Oh, Splash. Okay.
Touchstone Pictures was created as Disney's live action PG movie house.
Got it. So Splash is a Disney film.
Mm-hmm.
Splash has an interesting approach to sexuality and nudity, because nudity is kind of a part of all these stories. Even like in the animated Little Mermaid, she's got like a seashell bra, right? Like that's how they solve the nudity problem for children's mermaids. They're just like, oh, the seashells just magically stick to their boobs. That's how it works under the sea.
Yeah, she needs help with gravity under the water where everything's buoyant.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
It all makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. And also that the human like shame that the mer people feel makes perfect sense. But so that's how they solve it for little kids. They just lie to them basically. They're like, oh yeah, there's a strategically placed sea detritus that, covers anything you shouldn't see. That's not going to work for Splash because adults, you can't do that. So in Splash, they gave Daryl Hannah really long hair that like covers her boobs.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, as a small child, I was scandalized because there are quite a few shots where you see her butt while she's just running around.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not sexualized. Like you see the reactions of some of the standers-by and people are like, oh my God, hot blonde lady who's naked. Like there's some there, but she's very just like, that's how she is. That's how her body is. And she hasn't been taught shame about it yet.
Mm-hmm.
However, Disney Plus sure wants to teach her shame about it, because you watch this shit on Disney Plus and they have added CGI hair extensions to cover Daryl Hannah's butt, and it looks weird and distracting. I don't like it, and I think it is a harbinger of bad things to come.
It is. I mean, it's also just bad work. Like when we finally watched it this weekend, I was like, the hair itself is actually like really good work from CGI. It looks like the hair itself looks like it's her hair. However, it looks like it's attached to her hips, which is where the problem is.
It
like, you
moves
wouldn't
weird
notice
in
it.
relation to the rest of her hair.
Exactly. It moves because
like
that's probably
skirt.
what they did. That's probably what they did when they, like, I'm thinking about like doing VFX work, and I'm like, if you add something like that, especially something like hair, which is a kind of difficult thing to easier now than it used to be, but kind of a difficult thing to accomplish. It's hair is hard to work with in CGI, and to get it to move the way you want, you have to attach it to a place that's moving the way you want it to. What they did was, I'm sure they didn't pay enough for this, because they were like, okay, we just need this on here. We just need this to cover it up. And they said, all right, well, the fastest way for us to solve the problem of how does her hair move to cover her ass, because her hair is going all over the place, and if you attached it properly to her head, it would probably sway and you'd see her ass. Instead, they're like, attach it to the top of her hips, and it goes, and it looks like she has a hairy ass.
It's weird.
It's super weird. And it's also, as you say, it's a harbinger of some very questionable things.
This is not being shown on a plane. This is not,
No.
I get like you're showing something on network TV. You cut the censored version for network TV. Fine, everyone gets it. This is Disney's own streaming channel.
It's also a butt. Like, everybody's got butts. Everybody poops. There's a whole book about it.
I'm just saying, I understand if you have FCC regulations or something like that there are times where I'm not mad about like cutting a film to air on network TV. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
But this is kind of the definitive Splash right now. If you want to watch Splash, people are going to watch it on Disney Plus. There's a little disclaimer, but it's not clear. You know, it's not being super explicit about what they changed. And I'm just like, why in God's name did, like, they're not sex scenes even, you know, like it's just a butt. Kids are not going to be traumatized by a butt. There's nothing to explain. Like, fucking reactionary idiots are always like, how am I supposed to tell my kid? I'm like, how are you supposed to tell your kid what the fuck is going on with that hair? That's going to be harder to explain. And you're probably not going to be able to give the great, concise explanation that Sean just did about what was wrong with that CGI. She was fucking naked, so she's naked. She doesn't know that you have to wear clothes because laws, which is why they give her the shirt. This didn't confuse me as a kid. I felt embarrassed. Sure. But I certainly wasn't like traumatized. It didn't harm me.
People were like, how do I explain this to my kid? It's like, well, if you have that much of a problem with it, if you have that much of a problem with it, don't show your kid the movie. But I want to show them the movie. Well, then clearly you're going to have to figure out how to actually be a parent. Some of us chose not to be parents because we don't want to deal with that shit. We don't want to be responsible for some, half a person not understanding the world. I don't want to have to explain the world to a tiny little version of me. I'm an asshole.
It's hard to.
I don't want to do that. So if you are not capable of doing that, maybe don't have a kid or give your kid to somebody else. There are plenty of people on the streets who probably want children. Give them away.
Don't give your kids to me, but you can pay me to come and explain whatever the shit is that you can't explain, because it's going to be something easy.
It usually is.
You know what would be hard to explain?
The Penthouse letter?
Yeah.
Every dirty comment, everybody's reaction to her. The thing that they don't edit out.
What they don't edit out of the Disney Plus version of Splash is, like, as I think about this, because now whenever I watch...
No more.
Exactly. I think about this. I think about, like, whenever I watch... I think about my 4-year-old niece a lot when I watch movies now. And I think about, like, could she handle this? What would need to be explained? What this, what that, what troubles me, whatever. Certainly when I watch kids' movies now, I'm always doing it through that filter now. And I'm like, you know what would be confusing to explain to my 4-year-old niece? When she's like, why did he say lesbian no more?
Yeah.
Not because like explaining lesbian would be hard. I don't know if she actually knows that word, but she certainly is aware that families come in all sorts of configurations and romantic love is between all sorts of different people. Like she's pretty sophisticated for age 4. But if I'm like, oh, well, see, he's a straight guy and he wrote a pornographic letter to Penthouse Forum telling a lie about how he made a lesbian into a straight woman because that's a thing that can happen with your dick. Like, that's not, I don't want to explain that. Like, that magic penis is that's a little tricky to explain to a small child. Ladies naked because she just got naked out of the ocean, that's not a problem. And it also wasn't sexual, and all the dirty sexual stuff, and I'm not saying they should have censored anything. Like, my argument isn't that they should have censored the Penthouse stuff. My argument is the fact that they censored the nudity and left all the like raunchier, like more complicated adult and like, I'm not really offended by any of it, but like I could make an argument about why it's offensive.
It's like if you're going to be editing for content, why are you editing for, you're editing out her ass. Why are you editing out her ass? Because you consider it somewhat sexual. Today. Or something like that. Well, then what about all the other content? It's because it fits a fairly conservative, like all the dirty comments, all his Penthouse letters and stuff like that. It still fits a very, very conservative approach to sex and the body because his whole approach to it is very lurid. He is the dirt. He's not the hero. He is, as we were just talking about, like it kind of would work better if he was the hero, if he had to learn something, but he's not. He's the fat, like comedy side guy. And also like, he very much fits, especially in the 80s, the trope of the oversexed like friend or brother who was usually a larger guy. There's a whole like gluttony thing that you could talk about with that fits with it. Potentially is like, oh yeah, he's gluttonous in that he's a fat guy, but also he's all like into sex and shit. Like that was, Rodney Dangerfield basically. Like everything he was cast in. And as much as I enjoy the ridiculousness of movies like Back to School. You? Yeah. Have I mentioned it enough on the podcast yet?
I don't remember.
I don't think I've mentioned it on the podcast yet. I think you just have to hear me joke about Back to School. And Jess. But she won't watch it with me. Which is fair. It's not like it's a good movie. I don't know why I enjoy it as much as I do. But like that was a thing. Like that's the thing. Like it's still, you can have these things because it's okay for him to do it because he's the gross guy. And the gross guy can have that. And that's still the case. It's still the case. You look at a lot of these movies, the physical characteristics have shifted somewhat, but it's still oftentimes guys who look somewhat like who look somewhat like John Candy. I mean, even if the most recent example that's immediately coming to my mind is Superbad with Jonah Hill and Michael Cera. Jonah Hill's the more lusty one. And for all of that, it's so conservative, and they pull that and they pull the censorship. And then on the other side of it, with the two movies we're talking about, we got The Lure, which is much more explicitly sexual, like actually has like sex scenes where people are like touching each other. And even like, what is it? There's even I guess it's a lesbian. Is it a lesbian sex scene if one of them is a fish? Does it just, I don't know, but there's that with the cop. And there's multiple things related to that. Like throughout, it's not, I made a note, it's not a shy sexual obsession, but people are outright fetishizing them, which is a whole thing. Like that's actually, I think there's people who more explicitly are like mermaid fetish now, but like seriously, like decades of that. Like I have friends who are like, yeah, I know, I always loved Ariel, and I'm like, yeah. So, but and even with that though, it's much more explicitly sexual. It's much more explicitly like outright fetishizing. Like the actual like nudity of the sisters, which is constant in the movie. They're nude as much as they are not, if not more so. It's usually non-sexual. Usually they're just walking around or singing their song or performing. And it doesn't make a significant effort to hide that nudity. Not like with Daryl Hannah and like, let's give her really long hair. They're just like, all right, their hair maybe is going to cover it, but like they need to move sometimes, but we don't care. We're not going to make a point of hiding any of it.
No, it's more like it makes sense that like under the sea, they'd let their hair grow really long. So sometimes it's in the way of stuff. Sometimes it's not. It's just, it makes sense. It makes sense to the characters.
Exactly.
Their nudity is determined by who they are, not like what other people are projecting onto who they are.
Exactly. And then, but the movie also doesn't fixate on it. The movie's not like,
no,
it's one of the problems I have when people complain about nudity or sex in films. And this is a thing that's coming up a lot. And there's a whole
here we go.
satanic panic thing that we could get into that I'm not going to. I'm not going to do it. Maybe that'll be
a we can do a bonus episode.
You know, we should do like a whole thing about this because I'll do 2 hours just on that. But like,
and then it'll be 4 because I've got 2 hours of stuff to say about it too. So
there we go. A super long episode coming. But I mean, the thing is like, it doesn't fixate on it. And my standard for it has been like comparing like these films to like when I think about like nudity in films, because we are, as I think we've mentioned a few times on the show, filmmakers. And I have included some form of nudity in many of my films. Well, a few of my films. There's 3, I think, that have, maybe 3. Yeah, 3 that have at least something around that. And my standard for it is, how are we shooting it? Are we shooting it to be like, look at it there, like one of those Playboy videos from the 90s, where they would like do the slow pan over the body, like
that's what we do in all your films.
I wish, Sean. No, but like it's like would somebody be naked in this situation? Yes. Okay. So how are you presenting it? Are you presenting it as look at this, or are you presenting it as they happen to be naked, but what you're showing in the film is just how a person would move and be in that situation, and focusing the camera not on the body, unless that's what's important, not on the body, but on rather whatever action is actually important, vital
or the
to the
emotion,
scene.
like
or the
what's
emotion
happening.
Yeah, what's happening? Like what's the point of the scene? And so I think, people fixate on like, oh, nudity. Well, nudity, that's bad. And you're objectifying. I'm like, actually, no. Just because somebody's naked in a film does not mean they're being objectified. No. And just because somebody's being objectified in a film does not necessarily make that a bad thing, depending on the context of the film. But but in this
very,
case,
very strongly with this.
But in this case, what we have is just they're walking through the scenes, and I can't remember, it was one of the reviews, or it was one of the notes about, or one of the discussions about the lure. I don't remember which one, and I don't want to give it much more attention. Was just commenting on, oh, they're naked all the time, so it's sort of like dirty like that. And I'm like, yeah, no, though. Like,
because
yeah,
if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're viewing everything through this like place of like a certain kind of male sexuality being centralized, and I'm not even saying male sexuality, I'm saying a certain kind, a certain sliver of the rich tapestry of male sexuality, I mean, whatever the fuck rich. That means.
But
you might be surprised. Anyway,
kidding. I wouldn't.
Anyway, this certain kind, if like that, I mean, it's the same shit we've talked about. Our pal David Edelstein and his response to funny games.
Mm-hmm.
But then also his response to any films with ladies in them, like when he reviewed the Runaways film, and he is basically like, oh, it's like spicy jailbait, but it's not like spicy jailbaity enough. And I'm like, that's not what that film's doing, actually. He can't view those female characters as characters.
No.
He's like, oh, they're not doing a good enough job objectifying them. And I'm like, no, they're telling the story about the actual young women who actually went through this like really interesting and fucked up experience of being like a rock and roll band that only got to like get up on stage because they were, being sexualized and sexualizing themselves. And that was complicated. And what is it like to be a young woman? Like when I saw that movie, Like, you know, I saw it with some friends of mine, and most of us were just like, wow, this reminds us of being teenagers. This reminds us of being young and being in these spaces with rock and roll and stuff going on. And, you know, we related to it. But then you get these male critics who like only see the Runaways, like all that is to them is, you know, like, oh, hot teenage girl. Should I feel guilty about this or should I just enjoy it? Like, couldn't relate to them, couldn't, you know. And then when there's even a biopic about those people, they're doing the objectifying.
Yeah.
The film isn't objectifying those characters. These critics and audiences just like, and the same thing happening with the lore is my point.
I absolutely agree. And I think as the note I put down was these two different approaches to the films, Splash and The Lure, are somewhat reflective of the story choices they make. In The Lure, the sisters don't hide their origins. They're they are, again, like, you know, they're nude through much of the film. They're never really hiding anything. Except for the fact that they kill people. They kind of hide that. Everyone's
not very well.
Not very well, but like nobody really cares.
Seems like there's a lot of people going missing around there.
Yeah. And I guess that policewoman knows. And so she's like, hey, you're a fish lady who kills people. Let's fuck. So I think one of the other things that really differentiates them that's interesting is that they are predators, as you were saying, and they're choosing this time to spend amongst the prey. And then in Splash, she's desperately trying to hide who she is, out of fear, and she's being stalked. Like, she's still prey, by Eugene Levy's character. And then she's got to be saved from the experimentation. I think, like, those approaches really show a lot about like where the filmmakers' priorities are. It certainly makes a big difference that the two filmmakers are who they are.
Ron Howard directed Splash. I don't think we mentioned that.
Yeah, Ron Howard directed Splash, and like I've seen some criticisms of like Splash that were mentioning how, well, this is what you get from a Ron Howard movie, and I'm like, I don't have a problem with Ron Howard movies. They're fine. They're not challenging, but they're fine. And I will always appreciate that he always puts his brother somewhere in the movies, because I love Clint Howard. So even if he's only just walking through as a wedding guest who gets yelled at, I'm like, I just love Clint Howard. He's just kind of like, I don't know, there's something about him. But you know, the filmmaker behind Smozinska, I think was what we agreed we would say it. Smozinska, her film, like, definitely, like, I mean, it just comes down to generational and gender differences, is part of it for sure. Not going to be all of it, but certainly part of it.
Some people are just also, you know, maybe think about certain things a little more deeply than others.
Absolutely. Not that we know anything about that.
No.
And since we don't know much about thinking about things, perhaps that we should not think about things while we break for an advertisement.
That's an excellent idea. Let's fill our heads with some information and then not process it.
Exactly. All right. And now we're going to not process some stuff.
Sean, we need to tell people about our Patreon.
I don't feel like it.
Why not? Why would we make one if we didn't want people to see it?
I just think they'll be overwhelmed.
Well, there is a lot of content on our Patreon.
Nicole? A lot of content? We have behind-the-scenes materials, early access to our short films, music videos, and podcasts, updates on current and future projects, video production and social media management training materials, a serialized sci-fi novel, personal writings, access to our award-winning films, small talk and meme, and other exclusive subscriber content. That's not even to mention all the other ideas we have.
Okay, maybe it is a lot.
And it all starts at just $2 a month. How much can people really handle at just $2 per month? And we update weekly. Weekly, Nicole.
Yeah, maybe it's too much to talk about now.
If they really feel motivated, I think it would be great for them to check out patreon.com/4milescircus and subscribe. There's even public posts available so they can get a taste for what we offer. But again, how much can people handle for as little as $2 a month?
I guess they'll just have to decide for themselves by going to patreon.com/4milecircus.
Yes, patreon.com/4, the word mile as in the distance, and circus as in where all the clowns are. All one word, no dashes or underscores.
There is just so much to be seen at patreon.com/4milecircus.
I'm so overwhelmed thinking about it, I'm going to cry.
Wonderful.
That was great.
I definitely didn't think about that at all.
I have so much new stuff just jangling around in my brain. No idea what to do with any of it, but it's there now.
It'll never go away.
So that was a conversation about 2 movies about mermaids.
Yeah, I think we touched on some interesting things about adaptation, how this particular story reflects on culture and gender relations, and I really think we cracked it. And nobody ever needs to talk about The Little Mermaid again.
No, this is the ultimate.
This is definitive.
This is definitive. All the notes we had, stuff we could have talked about, and didn't. We never need to.
Never.
Nobody else does either.
No.
Other versions of this story, who cares?
Doesn't matter.
It's done now. We did it.
It's over. It's all over.
It's all finally. Blessed peace. Gonna go climb under my electric blanket now. Oh, but first questions for listeners.
What questions do we have for listeners?
We're done, but are they done? Oh, we don't think so.
What questions do we have for them? I would be interested to hear what listeners think about those gender dynamics, and especially like about the reversal with Splash. Well, not really a reversal with Splash, but like the switch of the protagonist. And like, do they think like a gender swapped thing where Madison is a dude would work, where it's a merman falling in love with a woman?
Still a heterosexual romance, of course, because what other kind is there?
Fair.
I mean, not in these movies. There's not. So like, I have another question. Are there other adaptations of The Little Mermaid that you think should be brought into this discussion, that you think add something else, or, are more aligned with Splash, more aligned with the lore, more aligned with something else entirety? Let us know. Let us know what you think about the source material and Hans Christian Andersen in general. I like it when my husband reads me Hans Christian Andersen stories before bed. That sounded weird. It's actually not, because they are rich with lots of description. And thus they will put you to sleep, because there will be like 5 pages of adjectives describing the undersea realm, and it's very picturesque and pretty and nice images to have floating around in your head with very little plot, so there's not really anything to follow and you just fall asleep. That's something I've observed in recent years.
Well, that's fun.
I have a complicated relationship with those stories. I think they're very think they have bad lessons, and they're very beautiful and interesting to me.
I mean, I think there's a lot of things that could fit under that kind of heading.
Oh yes, there are.
Any other questions? Do they agree with our assessment of the approach of these 2 films and sexuality? Do they think like, no, you guys are wrong about The Lure. The Lure is just dirty. It's a dirty movie.
Tell us about it.
Yeah.
We want to hear. Do you think that actually Aquamarine is the feminist commentary that should have ended the whole Little Mermaid adaptation train whenever Aquamarine came out, a film I haven't seen, or Splash 2 for that matter? Tell us about these films we didn't watch, or I didn't. I don't know what Sean did.
No, I haven't seen Splash 2. I wouldn't. No.
Is Daryl Hannah's character in Blade Runner and Splash actually the same character?
Oh, are you saying is maybe in the future Madison becomes Pris?
I think that might be what I'm saying.
Could happen. It could happen. They never said that she wasn't a replicant. And they never said the replicants weren't mermaids. The replicants are biots, which means they're constructed from biological components. Pris could be constructed from the remnants of Madison.
Relatedly, I just watched Johnny Mnemonic, and we need to talk about that. But
oh God, we do.
That's for another day. For now, Sean, where can people find us?
Well, we're 4 Mile Circus. That's the number 4 with the mile like the distance, and circus like where clowns are. And you can find us at 4milescircus.com. You can email us, info@4milescircus.com. You can find us on the Twitters or the Instagrams at 4 Mile Circus. You can find the show at anchor.fm/the celluloid mirror. And there you could potentially leave us a little voice message where you can respond to these questions. Let us know what you think. Call us a bunch of jerky jerk faces, whatever it is you want to do. Send us a message. Tell us what you think about the films, about the show, and hell, while you're at it, if you don't want to confront us directly about how we suck, just go ahead on over to Apple Podcasts, and you just go ahead and you leave us a little review right there. We had several right up front, but I don't think we've had any in a while. It'd be really fun to hear how we suck or how much you love us. One or the other. They're both legit.
Or both. Maybe you think we completely disrespected The Little Mermaid, but you think we made an excellent point about Aquamarine.
There you go. Apparently, Nicole really wants to know about Aquamarine.
So badly. It's keeping me up at night. It's a problem.
So let us know what you think. All those ways. Again, 4 Mile Circus, number 4, mile like the distance, and circus like where clowns are. All one word. However you want to find us. And we will be back next time with some more films and guest. I don't think we've settled on the order yet, but we got some fun new ones coming.
We got
soon.
some people told us they'd be on the show. Really, I don't think they were playing a mean joke on us. I think they're going to show up.
It could happen. We've had enough actually show up that we should probably plan for it more and prepare. So with that, goodbye.
Bye.
I ended up in that hall of yours. There was another girl. She looked like me. Exactly like me.
Can you come with me, Jules?
That'll do.
It happens when the story dies. The evil is set free.
I have to return some videotapes.